Hey, good morning, colleagues. Welcome to this session. This is a very important and exciting session for a country like ours, and because we are becoming globalized now. So, as your chairs, I'm Busisiwe Mkhacha. I am the president of the College of Anesthetists, and I'm with Dr. Lukazia from Muhimbili University, Tanzania. So, we are chairing this session. Say hi.
Hello, everybody. I believe in diversity, and there's always strength in diversity with unity. Welcome.
Thank you. So for the first talk, we've got Dr. Sade Hendricks. She's my colleague from the Eastern Cape, Gqeberha. She is a counselor at SASA and the lead in the Diversity Equity Committee. Please come up and welcome. Let's give a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Prof, for that introduction. So thank you to the LSC for inviting me to speak on this topic. And I'm really privileged to be able to speak on this in this country, in this time. And this is something that's really close to my heart. And I'm so passionate about it. And it's personal for me, which you'll hopefully see from this presentation. So today I'm going to talk about diversity and does it influence patient outcomes. So Prof has outlined my disclaimers already. I do serve on the SASA Council, where I'm the tied co-convener. I'm also affiliated to the Walter Sisulu and Nelson Mandela Universities, and I'm not by any means an expert in this. These are all of my own opinions and my own personal stories. I'm not an expert, and I've received no sponsorship for this presentation. So my talk is going to outline some general concepts around diversity, equity, inclusivity, and transformation, and how that affects patient outcomes. But I'm going to digress from the topic a little bit and focus more on why diversity is important in our context and just in life in general. And then I'm going to cover some of the mechanisms like cultural competence and representation and how that impacts health. So when we talk about diversity, the Oxford definition defines it as the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. And really that etc. is the important one because of our history, we often just focus on ethnicity and race, but diversity is so much more than that. There are a multitude of things that contributes to diversity and makes us all different from each other. So today I want to emphasize why diversity, equity, and inclusion are vital for improving healthcare outcomes and reducing the disparities in health in South Africa. Earlier this year, there was an opinion piece on Medscape, and it's called "You Can't Spell Medicine Without DE and I." And this is really important for a number of reasons. Sorry, I've just lost my place a little bit. But let's talk about DEI, or as we've coined it in SASA TIDE. And I'm going to speak to the transformation bit first because it's actually the most important. And the transformation bit is what enables the diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So we haven't kept up with the global trend of calling it DEI. And at SASA, there's been a lot of back and forth about whether to keep the transformation or not. But this is from the SASA Transformation, Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity policy. And it says, transformation is conceptualized as a reorientation from past values, policies, and practices to a future defined by the elimination of all forms of unfair discrimination, addressing the effects of past discriminatory policies and practices, and forms of unconscious bias that lead to discrimination. And it goes on a bit more, but that really encompasses and underpins our context here in South Africa. And that's why at this moment we can't yet get rid of the transformation bit, because that transformation is like the GPS. When you take a wrong street and it goes rerouting. It's like, stop, you're going in one direction, change your direction so that you can enable diversity, inclusivity, and equity. And then we move on to the diversity part, which I've already defined earlier, and it's just presence of variety within an organizational workforce. And again, many, many facets to diversity and things that contribute to making us all different from each other. And then equity encompasses fairness and justice, and it considers what makes each person unique and what they can contribute to the organization. And I mean, this picture, I'm sure everyone in this room is here because DI concepts are important to them, has seen this picture. And this picture really speaks to the difference between equality and equity. And the reality for us in South Africa in healthcare is probably not so much what's shown over there. This wall is probably so high that even that person can't really see. But when the wall gets broken, because the system is broken, but when the wall gets broken down, there are some people who can see better than others. And for us in the Eastern Cape, we really are this little blue person here all the time, and everybody's struggling. Those walls are all the way up. Nobody can see over the walls. But when you do break down the walls, some people are still a bit better off than other people. And so everyone can't be treated the same. There are some people who just need more help, support, opportunities, exposure. And that speaks to lived experience. So this is me here, and this is my sister. And even though we come from the same lovely family, same parents, grew up in the same household, by virtue of the fact that we grew up in two different times in life, for all the other tick boxes, we both identify as colored females, sort of mid-age, 30s-ish, 40s. I'm taller, she's older, in case you were wondering. And, we identify and we tick the same check boxes, but our lived experiences are so different. So Bianca was born in 1980, and she attended a co-ed quintile 3 school in the colored community. In fact, the same school where our dad was a teacher all of his life until grade 7. 1994, the schools are opened, and off she moves to the prestigious girls-only quintile 5 former Model C school. And for high school, that's her path. Same year, 1994, I begin my school career in this quintile 5 prestigious girls' school, okay? And at that point, our parents have now increased their own education, and teacher is now got a bachelor's degree in education and is the principal of a school. Mother, who was a staff nurse all our lives, has now got her BCur through bridging course and is now a sister in theatre. So the lived experience for us throughout our schooling career and throughout our time growing up was completely different based on what we were exposed to. And I was exposed to different things for longer than she was. And I mean, that is just life. But it shows you how you can't assume that even two girls from the same family have had the same exposure and lived experience. So diversity does not even guarantee insights from people close to the problem. Lived experience speaks to that. So then we also move on to inclusion, which focuses on creating a culture where everyone feels heard, where everyone feels seen, and where everyone feels like they belong. So I love this quote. Diversity, I love a picture of my family, and I love a quote, which you'll see. Diversity is what exists. Diversity is inherent in us. It's a fact of life. We can't change it. We're all different. It's how we are. It's who we are. What we do with that is inclusion. And inclusion is what must be done to embrace the existence of diversity. Diversity is a fact. Inclusion is an action. So now the scientists here have all come to want to know, does diversity impact patient outcomes? Because then we're going to change things if it makes people get better. And I mean, I can tell you categorically, yes, underlined and in red, it does. Okay, and that can be the end of my talk. But I'm going to go on a little bit more. So there was this study that was, it was an umbrella study, and it looked at healthcare data, looked at other industry data, and it put all the studies together and looked at them. So is there correlation between diversity and patient health outcomes? Absolutely, yes. It increases compliance, it increases patient satisfaction, and in a diverse healthcare practice, there is more accurate diagnoses made. Is there an association between workforce diversity and financial outcomes? Yes. increased innovation, increased productivity, and increased accuracy in more diverse teams. I mean, this is pretty interesting because looking at this room, it's beautiful to see the wealth of diversity and, people from all sorts of different walks of life, different races, different ages. But step out of this room and go into your own little department, go into your own practice, and think if it represents what we see here in this room where we all come together. And that's where that's important. So as a country as a whole, we are rich in diversity, but we need to take that back into our individual spaces that we work and function, and that's where we're going to see these benefits. Thirdly, does that strength of association differ between worker level diversity and that of top management? And again, yes, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about that later. Then there was this study done, published earlier this year in the British Journal of Surgery, where they defined gender diversity as teams who had more than 35% female anaesthetists and surgeons. And the outcome that they measured was 90-day mortality. And the results showed that with a higher gender diversity, there was a 3% lower odds of a 90-day major morbidity, just with a significant value. I mean, that's huge. Just the fact that there are males and females working together improves patient outcomes. But why is this happening? What makes it happen that if we work together and we're different, things are better? So other industries have really demonstrated the impact of diversity, increased creativity and problem solving, adaptability. Employees are more engaged and stay doing the same work. It's better for the brand image and the reputation, and there's better decision making. But let's quickly break it down a little bit. So increased performance. Interactions and information exchange becomes easier when people can identify with others who are like them. And so through that, you're able to have better decision making, and they can consider a broader range of ideas and produce more possible solutions. But at the same time, this is also a double-edged sword, because as much as the diverse teams are smarter and more efficient, because of the differences in people, there's also a potential for conflict because people have differing ideas. And that's where leadership comes in. So leaders need to be able to manage that and allow people to voice their lived reality and also encourage others to understand others' views. And that's where leadership is key in managing a diverse organization or group, and to make use of the function and the inherent improved productivity of that diverse group. And then innovation also needs new ways of thinking and doing things, and not just new ideas that people bring to the table. And it's unrefined, it's messy. And in order for your team to become innovative, you'll need different perspectives, different approaches to problem solving. You need people who are going to challenge assumptions and who are going to push boundaries. And diverse and inclusive teams with good leadership that can foster that culture is an environment where people can be themselves without judgment, and that means they're going to take more risks and share more new ideas when they feel safe in that space. So as we know, South Africa's healthcare system is grappling with the legacies of apartheid. We've got decades of racial segregation and unequal access to resources, and this has created huge disparities between different racial and ethnic groups, even geographic groups. And we know the health disparities in South Africa are stark. I mean, this is what the hospitals we work in, if we work in state hospital, look like, and you would never see any of this in private hospitals. And for example, the maternal mortality rates are higher in rural areas compared to urban areas. Similarly, you've got diseases such as TB, HIV, and diabetes, which is disproportionately higher among Black South Africans, particularly in low-income communities. So these disparities are not just a result of biological factors. It's also social, economic, and historical factors that have intertwined and are deeply ingrained in these. And so access to healthcare, socioeconomic conditions, level of education, and even geography play critical roles in determining health outcomes. Our hospitals, our government hospitals in the Eastern Cape, everyone's struggling at the moment, but our government hospitals in the Eastern Cape are not even comparable. I have not seen a PCA pump in 3 years since I left Tygerberg Hospital, and I work at a tertiary centre, supposedly. On an ordinary day, there are no needles or syringes. So everyone's struggling. It's bad everywhere, but some people are just worse off. The disparities are stark. And this is why we have to start prioritizing diversity and inclusion in healthcare. It's not just a matter of fairness, but it's essential for effective care. And the concept of transformation, as I shared earlier, remains so relevant still, even 30 years after democracy. That going in one direction, needing to stop and change direction intentionally so that we can fix this. Then there's the concept of cultural competence, and this is the ability of healthcare workers to understand, respect, and work effectively with patients from cultural backgrounds that are different from their own. So I actually work in the same hospital that I was born in 1987. And for me, that's such a huge privilege to be able to treat and administer the community that my parents were raised in. I was fortunate that I was never raised in that community. We had long moved out, but it's such a privilege for me to be able to administer healthcare to my own community and my own ancestors, and even some of my own family members that still remain in those areas and seek treatment at those hospitals. So we need to acknowledge that some South Africans are still going to attend their traditional healers and consult their herbal medicines before they seek hospital care. And if we as healthcare workers dismiss or ignore those patients are going to feel that they can't have any trust or faith in us, and they're going to default with the treatment because we don't have a cultural sensitivity towards them. So when we are culturally competent, we foster more trusting and open relationships with our patients, and this contributes to adherence and better outcomes for them. And this trust is especially important in our country, where mistrust in the healthcare system, especially in rural and underserved and poorer communities, lingers because of those injustices, and see why that transformation, rerouting, is still so important today. Representation is another critical aspect of diversity in the workforce, and a healthcare team that reflects the diversity of the population it serves is more likely to understand the unique needs of that population. We've still got quite a lot of gender disparity in anesthesia and actually all aspects of medicine. And women remain underrepresented in academic and leadership positions with honor awards and academic promotion. But that's a whole different talk on its own and something I'm also very passionate about. but my time's going to run out. But with diverse teams, you have different perspectives, and this can lead to better problem solving, innovation, and patient care. So, for example, a Black female doctor may be more attuned to the specific health challenges faced by Black women in South Africa, the higher rates of maternal mortality, and can advocate better for those services in those areas. Patients are also more likely to trust and feel comfortable with healthcare providers who share similar backgrounds, and this is crucial in improving engagement with our patients, especially in these marginalized communities. So every day is an absolute privilege for me to go to work and be with people who can relate to me. And this is just another example of how representation matters. So that's my mom, that's a sister, that's me, and this is my daughter. And this is 3 generations of women who clearly love pink. But this is also 3 generations of women who have created exponentially more opportunities for the next generation. And the knowledge that someone that they can relate to is able to do and achieve that is so important. So Doc McStuffins over here, her motives are still a little bit questionable. When I say, Bells, what are you going to be when you grow up? I'm going to be a doctor like you, Mom. Okay, why? So that when you get called out, then I can go with you to the hospital. Hey. So, in conclusion, diversity in healthcare is not just a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity. In a country as diverse as South Africa, we have to be equipped with cultural competence, representation, and an awareness to meet the needs of all of our patients. We've seen how the health disparities of the past persist, but we need to prioritize diversity and inclusion to improve health outcomes, build trust between our patients, and provide and create a more equitable healthcare system. And it starts with each person individually going to the spaces that they're in and advocating for transformation, which is to drive inclusivity. Because remember, diversity is inherent, it's a fact of life. The action is inclusion, making people feel welcome, making people feel seen. Unfortunately, it's not going to be comfortable. It's not comfortable for anybody. It's not comfortable for the people who are starting to be included. It's not comfortable for the people who have to change what they know and start including people who are different from them. But embrace that discomfort, knowing that you're going to grow and learn through it and be able to do and be better. Let's build a healthcare system together that truly reflects the rich diversity of the country and what we can see in this room, so that we can not only heal the body, but also the divisions of the past. And like I said, it's refreshing to see what this room looks like. And although we have a very long way to go, we need to remember what the horse says. Yes, but look how far we have come. I thank you.
Thank you so much to Sade. I feel like crying listening to her. I think in the interest of time, I'll call up the next speaker. But if you've got a question for Sade, please write it down. We'll discuss it at the end. So our next speaker is Dr. Edwin Lugazia, from my co-chair that I've introduced, and he's going to talk to us about African solutions for African problems. Please come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Marar, for the introduction. And I think I should express my appreciation for the local organizing team for giving me this opportunity to talk to this august audience. Well, diversity, I believe in ensuring that we have a diverse team that can lead us to the promised land. So my talk will cut across the previous talk that we have listened to since morning, and probably I might not give examples. I expect the audience to relate with what I'm talking and make sure that by the end of the day, we have looked at the importance of this topic in healthcare, and more importantly, why do we need to have local grown solution, and how can we work together rather than working in silos to make sure that we reach our goals. So those are the outline. Why local solutions? And then what are the challenges that we need to address together in unison so that we can get the better outcome for each of us? And then what considerations do we need to keep into account while we are trying to scale up these solutions to reach each and everybody? We've heard that we have disparity in healthcare system, equity. So how can we make sure that every one of us enjoy the basic human rights, that's access to quality healthcare? And then, of course, at the end of the day, we'll have a last slide. Well, why? You see, if I teach you to fish, it's quite different from giving you a fish each and every day. If I teach you, that means yourself and your generation will be able to sustain yourself and will be forever grateful rather than giving a fish. So we need to avoid handouts. We need to avoid to be assisted at each time. We need to grow and start working rather than crawling all the time. And then, of course, this goes without saying, we need to be self-reliant, either at individual level, facility level, national level, even at continent level as Africa. Thus, we need to have solutions that will enable us to enjoy quality emergency critical care and operative services. So my talk will be healthcare system, but actually the context will be eco services. Well, the whole talk is being self-reliant. This means we need to attain universal healthcare by 2030, Sustainable Development Goals, also the aspirations of the African Union, the Africa we want, the Agenda 2063. So the Agenda 2063 has a lot of things that as a continent we wish to attain, including peace, good healthcare system, good transportation, food security, a healthcare system that's responsive to emergency, resilient, and we are able to overcome whatever is thrown our way. So with this, that's where we should all be looking at. That's a map of Africa with the different regions, but my talk will be looking at how do we unite together rather than working in silos in different regions. How do we work as a continent to make sure that we move together? That was it contains some of the data that was done assessing these aspirations and how we've gone so far. As you can see, we are around 30, 50, 60%. We've not reached 100%, but 2063 is not far. When we started the Sustainable Development Goals, people were thinking that 2030 is far, but it's next. So if we don't put our act together, we might reach 2063 without attaining the Africa we want. This is a healthier and more prosperous Africa. Health caters for everything. Health is a driver for economic growth, well-being, as well as whatever development you want to attain. You need to have a healthy community. So from this Agenda 2063, the health perspectives or the aspect that we need to contain ourselves with include building a stronger health system that is resilient, capable of adapting to any changes or any challenge that is thrown at it for sustainability of human life. This is quality human life. We need to have transparent and accountable health governance system. With poor governance, we'll never be able to provide equitable quality healthcare to our people. And then, of course, we need to have safe health environment where, as healthcare providers, we'll be taken care of. Our well-being is put into context, and in that, we also enable us to provide quality healthcare to our patients that encompasses patient safety as well as the quality of the service that we provide. And then we should also remember human rights should prevail, whether we are in a war situation or in the normal routine situation with abundance of resources or with resource constraints. We should always make sure that everybody enjoys this basic human right of quality healthcare. Then, of course, diversity. Our care should be client-centered, patient-centered. We should also remember that we have diverse clients, different background, different cultural background. So we need to incorporate this in the healthcare services that we are providing to these patients. So respectful care that has a component of human dignity, cultural diversity, as well as whatever any differences that we might have from individual, family, as well as the community differences. So as healthcare providers, we should adapt ourselves to make sure that we fit into the situation or the community that we are called to serve. So why address this issue as an African issue? Why African solutions for African healthcare problems? Well, we might have different backgrounds, different geographical locations, but when it comes to analyzing the healthcare system, we all have common issues. Our challenges that we face are more or less the same. The first and foremost is human resource shortage. This is in both quality as well as quantity. We are short of numbers. If we ask people here, majority will say that we have more than 50, 60, or 70% shortage of the required healthcare workforce, and we've resorted to task shifting and task sharing. That's an issue that we need to address. We are not sure of the quality and the equity thing that people receive, depending on who's taking care of it. Is it a specialist? Is this somebody who has been given a task sharing role? And then what background do they have? Then the infrastructure. When you're at a tertiary hospital, what's at your disposal for healthcare provision is quite different from someone who has a primary healthcare level. So, and some of them from the previous talk we had, you might need extra resources, extra funds thrown here because you may be missing the basic amenities provide the healthcare services that are quality and that encourage patient safety. Technology access. Well, in the morning, we're talking about AI-assisted monitoring. While in some area, you don't even have a mere pulse oximeter or capnography. So you see the disparity. So, but that does not mean that for those who are in Cape Town, South Africa, Dar es Salaam, are better than those who are in the villages. No, we all are human beings. We deserve the same right to quality healthcare services. So let's have equity in whatever healthcare services we receive. That means strengthen the referral system, a clear pathway that ensure that each and everyone at the different levels that we are being cared for have the best that is expected. Then, of course, leadership and governance. That's an issue that cuts across. As leaders, some of them are not accountable. Some of them are leaders simply because they've been appointed to that position, but they don't know what it takes to fight for the people that you lead. Are you mobilizing resources to make sure that they have the same quality of healthcare services as somebody else in another administrative region? No. So we need to address that so that all the leaders can be good advocates for the healthcare system, make sure that they fight for the budget that is appropriate for what is expected. Majority of the countries do not have the healthcare budget that is expected. We have 50 or less than that. Yeah. So training and education. I did not put it last because it's the last now. Actually, it's the most important. It's the pillar. If you don't train healthcare providers well, you don't give appropriate educational guidelines or supervisions, then you'll be churning out quantity, number of health providers, but do they meet the goals? Can they provide the expected services? Do they have the right competencies? These are issues that we need to address as a continent together, not in silos as country or regions. Okay. So how do we get out of this difficult situation? So I think we need to have a common solution that cuts across Africa with adaptation and adoption to the context of that particular area, whether it's a facility or region, district, or nation. And then we need to plan how to get the necessary resources and strategize how to employ these resources and strategies to get the results that we desire. So the question of leadership comes in, the question of ownership will come in, and of course, collaboration and unity. We'll see this as we go along. But all in all, whatever we decide to do, we should always remember that it boils down to strengthening the health building blocks. That is having strong leadership and governance for policy, and then of course resource mobilization, that's finances, and then information system to give you the data that will help you making decision. Medical products, let's produce our own products. It could be cheaper and we could share within Africa. And then of course service delivery that cuts across with the same guidelines and quality of care. So we need to generate evidence that will give us solutions that will be appropriate for our environment. And then, of course, we should leverage on technology, research experience, then local knowledge, and then the experience that we have there. And then take available innovations, scale them up, and then make sure that they're integrated and institutionalized. So research will play a major role. Translational science, implementation research will help us identify the gaps where we are not doing well, and this will give us local data that can help informing decision makers and policy change. Yeah. And then of course it also helps us in building capacity. So these are some of the areas that this implementation research can concentrate on. It could be the human resource, the different aspects of human resource that need to be addressed. What are the challenges in a particular region, or what is the challenge in Africa? Where are we lagging behind? What can we do to improve? And then, of course, the infrastructure and equipment availability. Why aren't we maintaining our equipment well? What are the possible solutions that look at the context that we have? The service delivery models, which will be the best service delivery model? The quality improvement approaches. Do we take the Japanese approach? Do we have an African approach? Can we modify, or can we put together two quality improvement or three to come out with one that is available and acceptable to all? The healthcare system strengthening, this is the backbone. We need to strengthen the healthcare system so that we can have the best of both worlds. Then technology integration, how do we move with the rest of the world? Incorporate appropriate technology for our environment to give the same quality of care. Then, of course, the workforce development, we have different approaches, but we could have unified forms or something that has been proved to be useful for the African context, and then employ that and scale it up. Infrastructure development, service model deliveries, and of course, at the end of the day, we should remember that we need to monitor and evaluate, learn from what we've done. Whatever we implement as an intervention, what can we learn from it? And then that will inform our next model of intervention or modifying what we have. Well, you cannot stress this more. Collaboration. Now, I'm not looking at collaboration as facilities, no, regional collaborations on Africa. The different regions of Africa, they can cooperate within the region as well as Africa as a whole. We talked about the trainings, College of Medicine South Africa, West Africa College of Surgeons, Canexa, now we have PATA. So all of these collaborations, they are having different models of training. We have resources within the continent. How do we utilize this to support other areas that are not well developed and build the human resource that can cater for each and everyone in Africa? Then, of course, how do we collaborate as a region to advocate for better quality of healthcare services? So we have the SADC Technical Expert Working Group that advises the health minister in the SADC region on different policies that can move forward surgical, obstetric anesthesia, and nursing care services. So we wish we would have the same bodies elsewhere in the different regions that will be advising our health ministers to move forward with these services. Then, of course, we need the political will. It's through networking that we can influence the politicians to give us the necessary resources and support us so that we can reach the goals of health to everyone. Well, as much as we'd like to have African solutions, we cannot run away from having our brothers, our supporters, people who have been there. WFSA, World Health Organization, the USAID, the UNICEF, UNFPA, you name them. They usually have different programs. It's up to us to take these programs, build the capacity base of them, and then scale up these high impact intervention. We need to engage government, state actors and non-state actors, regional NGOs. So we make sure that we bring them on board, but at the end of the day, make sure that they build capacity. They have the resources. We have the safe model programs of trainings, mobile simulation training, different training, vast. All these models, if you look at the way they are structured, they have trained the trainer. Once you've run the model in your country twice, we've trained the trainer. You have local trainers who can do that. So empower them to scale that, make sure that it's incorporated in the government programs. For us, what we've done the mentorship programs. So if you have a structured mentorship program, those who are at higher level can always go down to the lower facilities, sit down with them, have a structured mentorship program, teach them, hold their hands, make sure that they acquire the skills and competencies that they are lacking. We've done this in Tanzania. The anesthesia society was leading. We started with the residents, moving to the different facilities in the regions, working with them for weeks, make sure build capacity, change the way they operate. We've revamped the surgical system, and then this was by the World Bank, UNFPA, USAID. Now I'm happy to say that the government has taken up this program. It's run the country over in regions at different times of the year, and is scheduled for. It's under the support of the government. The president is Mama Samia mentorship program. So we've scaled up surgical sections everywhere. Yesterday we had talked about using surgical camps to make sure that we support these services. We can do that, but make sure that they have a component of you assess the needs, build the capacity, have the resources, and make sure that when you go out, these camps will have changed the landscape of the healthcare provision where you are. Don't just move in and then move out. No, you're saving to reduce the backload of surgeries, but at the same time, make sure that it is structured. You don't have to do the bulk. You see, you have two types of surgical camps: quantity and quality. The quantity is when you have the numbers, but at time in between, have a surgical camp that is for local capacity building. We've been able to do that with the cardiac surgeries, with the different camps that were coming in, teams, north, south, but right now we're encouraging south to south. If South Africa can do it, they can move to Zimbabwe, they can move to somewhere else, Tanzania can move to somewhere else. We work together, then The smart train, Operation Smart, let's incorporate these, they build capacity, and then we sustain that as a. Then, of course, supportive supervision. Somebody talked about using technology. For us, for maternal health care, anesthesia, and the surgery, we have WhatsApp groups that each region has obstetrician, anesthesiologists, midwives, the government officials, the blood bank, everybody's there. If you have a problem, a difficult case, you just throw it there, and then you get the support from each and everybody in the country. So we can do that. So let's maximize the impact of these interventions, the camps, make sure that we build local capacity, we change infrastructure by advising what needs to be improved, and then collect data and utilize that to inform decision making as well as policy change, and of course resource mobilization, and ensure that you have the government collaborations, NGOs, use that as time for advocacy, yes, and then strengthen the healthcare system. The challenges are there, running from sustainability, equity, quality of care, cost effectiveness, and resource constraints, but these can always be overcome if you work together and put your heads together. You can always change this. Always remember that ethical consideration, cultural barriers, workload, and technology, these are things that might bring diversity in the team that are working together. Keep them in mind. And then adapt and scale up high impact interventions. Make sure that they are standardized, incorporating the existing healthcare systems, and then build sustainability for those high impact by empowering local experts and stakeholders for sustainability. This means you need to empower the leadership, have knowledge and skills transfer, advocate skills for the leaders for these healthcare services, governance and leadership, and make sure that you have monitoring evaluation of what you are doing so that you can always present what you've done, the good thing, and have support to move the work forward. So what do we need to do? We need to empower our healthcare systems to institutionalize and implement the context-specific solutions for continuous quality improvement in Africa, not only one region. Whatever has been found to be used somewhere else, adapt it, contextualize, and scale it up. Well, if we work together, we should be able to attain universal healthcare, sustainable development goals, as well as the Agenda 2063 goals. But we need to work together. But well, before I go, I think I should use this opportunity to invite each and everyone in this room, plus your colleagues back home and their families, to join us in 2027 in Arusha, Tanzania, when we'll be holding the next All African Anesthesia Congress. Thank you so much for.
Okay, thank you very much. I think your talk is very relevant, especially at this time, because we are undergoing a lot of changes in our country when it comes to health services. So I'll call up the next speaker because we haven't got time, but please, if you've got a question, write it down. The next speaker is Mark Haywood. Is he not with us? Okay, so I'll call up the next speaker, which is Prof. Wayne Morris. We've listened to Prof. Morris. He's the IPP of WFSA. And yeah, and I think yesterday we had a good talk, and this morning you've been introduced. We expect to have a very nice perspective from you when it comes to this topic from WFSA. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's once again a pleasure to be speaking, and thank you to the organisers for this amazing meeting. Last evening, I had the privilege of going to a quiz night put on by the organisers of the conference. It was a good fun evening and it became very competitive. But the team next to us did considerably better than our table. And that's because they had a more diverse team. They had a good gender mix, they had a good mix of age, and a good distribution of where people came from. So I think that's all the evidence that you need, that we need to be concentrating on improving diversity, equity and inclusion. We did, however, beat them on one question, which was identifying a song sung by Steve Tyler and Aerosmith. They thought it was Bon Jovi. I just had to put in this photo. It's totally irrelevant to the talk, but we went on an amazing trip to Botswana and also Vic Falls before this meeting, and we got to do a number of walking safaris in the Delta, in the Okavango Delta, and these were amazing. And our guide there is Raps, and I'm with my wife Jackie and Raps, and one of the highlights was actually tracking and then seeing 3 lions on foot. It did seem a very weird thing, though, to be looking at lion paw prints in the sand and running after this lion. It seemed a little bit round the wrong way. But this guide was an incredibly knowledgeable man in touch with his environment, and it was a real privilege to be able to do those walking safaris. So this is the outline of my talk. I'm going to briefly define DEI. I know that Sade has already done that, but so I will reinforce some of the things that she said. I'm going to talk about WFSA and representation, talk specifically about WFSA leadership and how that has evolved, and then the World Congress. Now, as was mentioned in the introduction, I'm the immediate past president of WFSA. I stepped down at the World Congress in Singapore, so I'm no longer part of the leadership of WFSA. But I think what will be saying is very much in line with the thinking of the leadership of WFSA. And of course, the final disclosure there is that I'm middle-aged, white, and male. And it's a good question. Why is a white middle-aged male talking to you about diversity, equity and inclusion? But I would like to point out that I come from New Zealand. So tēnā koutou katoa, which means welcome to you all from my country, Aotearoa, New Zealand. I live and work in Christchurch, which is a small city on the east coast of the South Island of New Zealand. And I trained in New Zealand. I also trained in Australia. I have worked in Australia, the United Kingdom, and also spent 2 years working and living in Fiji. And I feel very much a part of the Pacific region of the world. In fact, over the last several decades, I think New Zealand, as a post-colonial country, like many people in this room, has really shifted, and our links with the UK have become less and less, and we very much identify as being part of the Pacific in our part of the world now. Here are a couple of photos from Fiji. So as I said, I worked and lived in Fiji for 2 years. That was from 2000 to 2002. Soon after we arrived, there was a coup and martial law and various other things happened, but I continued to work there. And the photo on the left shows the graduation ceremony at the Fiji School of Medicine in 2001. I'm with Luke Nasendra, who has gone on to become the anesthesia leader in Fiji, and Isao McCole from Micronesia in the North Pacific. And I've kept very close links with the Pacific. And in 2001, I was part of a team, an Australian-New Zealand team that was invited to advise the Fijian colleagues about management of COVID. That's Luke in that photo too. So he's put on a bit of weight and I've lost some hair. So first question is DEI. What is DEI? And I think this is a term that's often thrown around, DEI, and sometimes we're not very good about what that actually means. So I really like this very simple graphic. So diversity is presence of differences. And I think that point was made really well by Sade. Equity is fair access, opportunity and support. And inclusion is that genuine sense of belonging and value. I'm not going to say anything more than that because I think these very simple definitions are about as good as I've come across anywhere. And I did look at some of the other definitions for DEI, and it's an area where there are some very complicated words, and I think overcomplication. This to me is the core of DEI. And I think another thing about this slide is that diversity is not the same as equity, and they're not the same as inclusion. You've already seen this cartoon showing equity and equality. Again, simple definitions. Equality is equal distribution of resources, but the little boy may still not be able to look over the fence. Equity is needs-based distribution of resources. Again, you can see some very complicated definitions, but this is about as simple as it gets. Also, as pointed out, this is the situation in many parts of the world, not just Africa, but many parts of the world. And including many high-income countries, I'd hasten to add. And sometimes there are really stark differences in availability of resources for different parts of our populations. This is just a photo I lifted from the web, and I don't know this organisation. It may be a fantastic organisation, but I think there is a tendency to make a DEI committee and then say job done. And that to me does not look like a particularly diverse group of people. They're all wearing nice clothes for a start. And diversity is a bit more complicated than that. So this may be a fantastic organisation, I don't know. But I think just making a DEI committee is not the answer to addressing DEI issues. So the question we must always ask ourselves in our organisations, so that's our societies, the World Federation, and our hospital departments and other areas we live and work, is are we making a difference or just ticking a box? So I want to talk about WFSA and representation, and I think WFSA has come a long way, but we have a long way still to go. I've shown this slide a number of times, but I want to make the point again that WFSA is a global professional membership organisation. It's not like WFSA's over there and we've got all our member societies here. WFSA is its member societies. And as I've said before, WFSA is as strong or as weak as its member societies. We have amazing global representation with 140 member societies representing anesthesiologists in 150 countries around the world. I mean, that really is amazing representation. But the last point is very important. WFSA represents anesthesiologists all around the world. We don't just represent anesthesiologists in low-income countries or middle-income countries. We also represent colleagues in high-income countries. We represent colleagues that sometimes disagree with the views of the World Federation, and we have to understand those different views and take account of them. This is a pamphlet entitled The Value of Your Federation. And I just want to highlight again, I know I've read this out before, but our vision is universal access to safe anesthesia, and our mission is to unite and empower anesthesiologists around the world to improve patient care. So this is the official line on WFSA's views on DEI. We added a section called our shared vision a few years ago, and the constitution was revised and approved at the World Congress in Singapore. And I think, you know, we can say that constitutions are just words, but actually you need to get the constitution right as the basis for your organisation, because that's what we go back to when, you know, we're making decisions about how the organisation is run. But look at these shared values: respect, unity, universality, I can't see that. Is that safety, collaboration, equity, and diversity and inclusion? Just to highlight the last couple of things. So equity, we encourage fair and equitable distribution of safe healthcare across populations. Diversity and inclusion, we value diversity and inclusion among individuals and within member societies, and encourages diversity and inclusion in all our fora, the WFSA's fora. One way that we really think about diversity is to think about the representation on committees and the board, the committees, the council, and things like that, by looking at the geographical regions of the world and ensuring that we have representation from these 6 geographical regions. So Africa and the Middle East is one region. Asia, there's a small region in terms of population, but not size, which is Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. Europe, Central and South America, basically Latin America and the Caribbean, and North America. Now, this is a pretty strange geographical categorization. If you think about it, Asia has 2/3 of the world's population, but it at least gives us a start for how we think about diversity and representation in the organisation. So our council, for example, must have 3 representatives from Africa and Middle East, 4 from Asia, 1 from Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific, 3 from Europe, 2 from Central and South America and also the Caribbean, and 2 from North America. And I just lost track of what I was going to say. No, I think that's sorry about that. That's all I wanted to say about that one. Oh no, I know what it was. Sorry. When you look at the council, that's about 15 people. When you think about the number of countries in the world, there are 194 UN countries. Now that's a lot of countries. So in the end, there's actually a relatively very small number of people representing their region on this WFSA Council. But that's just one of the realities. You do need to limit the numbers. You can't have a council of 100 people or 200 people. This is our secretariat, which in January 2024, I think had 12 people in it. And you'd have to agree that it's a pretty diverse looking secretariat. Can anybody tell me what we're missing in terms of diversity? Disability, but also age. They're all incredibly young. Yeah, they're a pretty young bunch, but it's a pretty diverse group, and I think we've really benefited from that diversity amongst our secretariat. And then looking at our committees which were elected in Singapore, we've got all these committees. There are 149 individuals on these committees, and we've got pretty good gender representation. And this is the representation by geographical region. And I was interested to see that Africa and the Middle East is actually reasonably well represented on our WFSA committees. Asia also, but there's actually pretty good representation. You're never going to get a perfect representation each time, but over a number of years, you hope there will be pretty good representation. So I was quite reassured by this. I want to look briefly at WFSA leadership. These are the WFSA past presidents from 1955 to 2024. So start on the right, and that is Harold Griffith, the very first WFSA president from Canada. He served as president from 1955 until 1960. And you can see that most of the people on the right side of the slide are older white men. And the majority of the presidents throughout our history have been from North America and Europe. We've seen a few more women in the last few years. The majority of people, though, in this picture are from high income countries. And unfortunately, that's been one of the realities of our organisation, is that it's been very difficult for somebody to be president unless they receive a lot of support from their home country. And I hope in time we will see this changing, and it will be possible for people from less resourced parts of the world to assume this position. But it remains a challenge. Our next two presidents, well, our current president is Daniela Filipescu from Romania, and in 2026 at the World Congress in Morocco, Carolina Haylock Law from Honduras will take over as president. So Honduras is, I think, still a lower middle income country, and obviously in Latin America. So the question is, who will be the first African WFSA president? And I think we are actually setting the foundation for seeing presidents from all over the world, but it's been a challenge actually building that foundation, and I think it will also take resourcing to allow presidents to step up from lower resourced countries. A few slides on the World Congress. These are some numbers from the World Congress. I was pretty excited about these numbers. So we had over 5,000 in-person participants from 142 countries. Now, there is no other anesthesiology congress like this in the world. So if another conference talks about being an international conference, it is nothing like this. 142 countries is incredible. We had some more virtual delegates, not as many as we were expecting. But another figure I was really excited about was that we had 535 faculty from 73 countries. 73 countries is not bad for an international meeting like this. If we look at registration, what we know about World Congress is that most of the registrants come from the region where the World Congress is being held. So it's just a reality that people are going to find it difficult to travel from Latin America to get to a place like Singapore. It's going to be particularly difficult for people from the African and Middle East region just because of the expense and the distance. So we are hoping that in Morocco in 2026, we will see a completely different graph. If we divide the registrants by World Bank income category, again, one of the realities is that the people who can afford to go to these congresses tend to come from high income countries. Some of the people in the smaller categories there would have received full support from WFSA or other partners. And I think just again, a reality is that organizing these conferences is incredibly expensive. It's scary when you look at the budget, and it means that registration, it does cost. And what we did do with registration here is have different categories of registration based on the World Bank income categorization. This was the breakdown graphs for our faculty. So we have pretty good gender diversity or gender representation with 49% female, 41% female, which is a big step up from Hong Kong, which was in 2016. And I think reasonable representation by geographical region. In one of the draft programs for the World Congress, we had a very high number of speakers from North America, up to 75% in some tracks. And I personally pushed very hard, along with a number of colleagues, to even that up. Again, what you would hope to see is over a number of cycles that these things will also even out, and we will expect very good representation from this region at the Morocco meeting. And one of the changes that we made recently is switch from a 4-yearly World Congress to a 2-yearly World Congress, and we see this as an important step in increasing inclusivity for the World Congress. So the next World Congress is in Morocco in April 2026. It'll be an amazing venue, and I hope that many of you will be able to get there. The one after that will be in Vancouver, and then there will be predictable rotation around 5 geographical regions around the world. We also committed as the leadership of WFSA to make the Congress accessible virtually. Although I guess at the moment people are so sick of virtual meetings in this post-COVID time that they will take a little while to get used to doing virtual meetings again. Right, my time's up, but just on to the key points. So WFSA represents a diverse global family of anesthesiologists. So we have to think about how we represent everybody, not just people from one region of the world or one income group. We must guard against DEI becoming a tick box exercise. It's not good enough just to set up a DEI committee. We've made progress, but I acknowledge there are still significant barriers, but it is something that is very much in our thinking, on our agenda, and I think the future looks promising. Better diversity, equity, and inclusion strengthens us all, and I think that's the thing that should always guide us. I couldn't resist putting in another couple of photos. So we've got some battler eagles on the left. I didn't realize that their beaks were that red. They're amazing. And we got to see a number of leopards up in Chobe National Park. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Wine, for the talk. Our next speaker is Dr. Ruben Naindu. He's an anesthesiologist and chronic pain specialist. He works in a private practice in Joburg, but he's also an ethicist, and he holds a degree in medical law. Yeah, so I think we'll have diversity within that.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for Professor Morris's presentation from a world experience. And now it's time for Africa. So these are my disclosures, and none unfortunately hold any pertinence to this talk, but I think I must make a social disclosure. And the social disclosure is that I am fifth generation African. I grew up in a middle-income home, and in 1994, I left the confines of an all-Indian school and went to a Model C school where I was a victim of marginalization based on how I looked, my gravitational challenge, my failure to be physically active or play rugby, and so it did scar me a little, and perhaps I do hold some bias in this presentation. Following the events of Stephen McGowan's talk on Sunday, I must actually make a normative ethical statement right now that I believe we cannot separate medicine from life and politics. And if we do, you're living in a vacuum where you fail to realize the existence of everybody's struggles in everyday life. And at this moment, I want to actually dedicate this talk to some of the greatest revolutionary minds on the African continent who themselves stemmed from the health services system. And those include the likes of Dr. Abdullah Abdul Rahman, Steve Biko, Professor Ramphele Mamphele, and from an international perspective, the likes of Ernesto Guevara de la Sena from Cuba. It is crucial to approach DEI conversations with curiosity, with empathy, and with the willingness to listen, to perhaps feel a little uncomfortable, and to know that with discomfort, we only can grow. Unfortunately, like Professor Morris and many of our other speakers described, many people use DEI issues as a matter of compliance, a tick check box thing in order to actually just do their due diligence. But actually, it should be used as part of a transformative culture shift. Because at the end of the day, we mustn't think of it as involving us now. We need to think of it involving our children's children, like in the words of Michael Jackson, heal the world, our children's children, because actually they are the ones that are going to reap the benefit of all our hard work today. And if we fail to actually do that today, we're actually doing an injustice, not to ourselves, but to our blood that we want to actually have live happily. Unfortunately, systems of medical professionalism, colonialism, economics, politics, they all are unfortunately all entrenched in the patriarchy. And again, the reality is, if we don't know where we have come from, how can we ever know where we should be going? And it's this acknowledgement that we have to realize that for over 500 years, the African continent were victims by which 90% of our continent was ruled by 7 European countries, the 3 largest being Britain, France, and Germany. And we must remember that I'm a theorist, so I must remind you what that definition of colonialism is. It was and is understood as the process of domination, of marginalization by a people of a people. And the process was underpinned by 2 fundamental objectives, namely cultural domination. My great-great-grandmother never spoke a word of English. I, with shame, do not speak her mother tongue today. And adjacent to cultural domination was the exploitation of resources, where they boldly display the coin or diamond or the star of Cullinan with such imperial regalness, and not realizing that Africa was the richest continent in the world, and today harbors poorest people in the world. And as the events of World War II happened, and the northern territories realized that perhaps we must move towards human rights ideology, we must move towards self-determination, many countries obtained their sovereign independence. And it saw through the 1950s to 70s lots of colonial rulers allowing independent states to seek their sovereign identity, often at the expense of violence, political turmoil, widespread unrest, and revolts. And we must pay homage to some of those experiences today, which include the Mau Mau Rebellion in the late 50s in Kenya, the Angolan War of Independence, which probably only ended in the late 1990s, the Algerian War, the Zambian War, and the Nigerian Civil War. In 1946, when the United Nations was established, there were 35 member states, many of them clutching quite violently to the dominions that they hold with such possession. And through these revolutionary processes, by 1970, the United Nations was made up of over 127 member states, many of which included all of these independent, sovereign third world nations. And one cannot actually talk about decolonization or colonization without appreciating this ethical concept of hegemony. Hegemony is the theoretical basis of all forms of subjugation. It is the political, social, economic, and often, unfortunately, military preponderance of one over another. It is the active ability for us to push somebody down, which we even see in the patriarchy, where men have subjugated women through the ages in order to maintain your dominant role in society by oppressing others. Europe had this idea that they brought in their Western ideologies and theories and essentially rooted it in Africa, while they at the same time allowed and silenced the indigenous epistemologies, which today we so casually refer as Eurocentrism, but we must actually remember that it's a system that originated through marginalization of our indigenous people. The challenge now confronts us. How do we today move forward from this hegemonic centricism and create a world in which multiple voices and alternative ways of being and knowing are not only recognized but celebrated? These counter-hegemonic struggles are needed in almost every domain of existence in Africa, including the epistemic domain, in order for us to usher in this vision of the future that we as Africans embody and envisage for our children and our children's children. In ethics, virtue is a behavior of having high moral standard, and justice is believed to be the first virtue of social institutions. And to that, social justice is placing the rights of all people at the heart of the economy, the social standing, the environmental policies. And it means we have to then cover and address issues of poverty, exclusion, and inequality. And the UN has officially declared February 20th as the official day of World Social Justice. So we must remember and acknowledge those that are marginalized and help to build and obliterate these segregative ideologies. Because we in Africa live in such diversity. And it's been so well described by many of our speakers. It's the way in which we all differ. And it is recognizing and embracing the existence of not only those visible differences of how you look or how you speak, but also those invisible differences, my religion, my political ideologies, my education, my past experiences, my lived experiences that bring me to this moment in my life standing here today. There's a beautiful map that the Harvard School of, again, the Western Harvard School of African Studies have depicted of a multi-colorful depiction of various ethnic groups that exist in Africa. And it bears testimony, this colorful dynamic existence, and it shows also the link to the geographical soil and land that we live on in Africa, of how the greatest variety seems to exist in the fertile middle equatorial regions, and through the deserts of the Kalahari and Sahara, the populations are more scanty. A failure to acknowledge value and diversity unfortunately stems from preconceived ideas, perhaps that are based through apartheid systems, the colonization systems, and how and essentially they're based on the idea of people's previous disadvantages, that perhaps white was superior, men are superior, white education was superior, men's opinions are superior. And how often do we as people of color have patients, I mean, ask me, sorry, have you done this before? How old are you? Or ask a female doctor, so are you the nurse? Again, these are preconceived, indoctrinated systems that we have to start building and changing. Think about the solo violin player in an orchestra and how beautiful that might sound. But when you put in the percussions, the strings, and all the other wind instruments, you don't only feel that orchestral movement in the vibration of your tympana, but you really feel it in your heart, in your soul, in your bones. And that's what synergy of our individual existence needs to actually build in me. And we've seen this slide multiple times, but what I'm more curious about is how we see it so differently amongst the speakers. I see equality as looking at what is available before assessing the outcome. That everybody is so obsessed about what I have now, irrespective of what that outcome is. Nobody cares about what they're all there for, to watch that soccer game. Whereas equity is focused on the outcome. Is everybody have access to happiness? Are they all enjoying that same soccer game equally? And it's important to look at the difference between the allocation of resources and measuring it against the outcome of what equity is. But I suppose the real question is, why is there even offense in the first place? And that's what true justice is, the breaking down of barriers. And unfortunately, yet again, year after year, South Africa has demonstrated to be the world's most unequal society, as measured by the Gini coefficient, which measures the deviation of distribution of income amongst individuals within a country from a perfect equal distribution, the green line of equality. But more interesting to note is, of the 10 most unequal nations in the world, 7 of them are in Africa, and the top 5 of those African nations exist in sub-Saharan Africa. If you look at the progress of South Africa's economy through the new dispensation, we can see that there definitely is a progressive trend to address poverty. The population's poverty is definitely increasing. But the blatantly obvious sign from this statistical analysis is that the disparity fails to change. The disparity that separates us and makes what we should all be the same different. And it brings back to the question of inclusivity. Equity propels inclusivity as it creates and sustains conducive and supportive environments. Inclusivity is a legal and moral imperative and is a human rights issue entrenched in all human rights tools. Inclusion is about creating that workplace and environment that values and integrates each person's differences. I remember at one institute that I began with when I was a junior doctor, having to have to go to eat my lunch in the car because I didn't feel comfortable in this tea room, that a language was spoken that I didn't understand. People just ignored me. And how many people are experiencing those same exclusivity moments and keep quiet about it? And this is what we must do, voice it, so everybody understands that not all experiences are the same. And again, as an ethicist, it brings me back to this groundbreaking paper back in 1989 in the Chicago Law Forum by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who described this beautiful concept of intersectionality or intersectional theory. And it's described as a theoretical approach based on the interconnected natures of social categories such as race, class, gender, sexual orientation, economic viability, and it creates an overlapping and interdependent system of discrimination and disadvantage. The intersectional experience is an exponential concept, greater than the sum of each individual experience. So if you're black, you are probably marginalized. If you're female, you're marginalized. If you're homosexual, you're marginalized. But can you imagine being a black female homosexual? It's compounded exponentially. Exploring feminism in the absence of an intersectional lens has been a driving force to marginalize women of color within a movement, the feminism movement, which was built by the idea of eradicating marginalization. So true feminism explores the interconnection of all social struggles. And with this idea of interconnection, of interdisciplinary, intersectional theory, we must pay homage to great anesthetic leaders in this land who have actually pioneered through struggles. Professor Palesa Mochabe and Mom Professor Busi Mrara. These are inclusive leaders who have had cultural flexibility and adaptability, who serve as role models to inspire young anesthetists in this country to mentor us and guide us towards what our future as anesthetists of the world should look like and be. Similarly, we must pay respect to our colleagues from Nigeria, Professor Bisola Onajin Obembe, who is a professor of anesthesia and is the president of the Permanent Council of the Global Alliance of Surgical Obstetric Trauma and Anesthetic Care. And we must also pay respect and homage to Professor Elizabeth Wasor, professor and chief anesthetist from Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, Nigeria, and who's also the WASA Council member of Africa and the Middle East. But what is it looking like for the normal doctor on the ground in South Africa? And this publication by Tiwaro in 2021 looked at the sexual and racial disparity that exists in South Africa itself. And it starts by making emphasis on where the current population statistics lie as at 2019, where 41% of the population were black female and less than 4% in green were white men. And if you look at the first bar chart all the way at the bottom, it represents the females back in the year 2000, at which point less than 4% of the total doctor population in South Africa were women. Taking us all the way back forward to 2019, the study shows that just under 13% of female doctors in South Africa are women. We are improving, and the trajectory is the right direction. And perhaps we need to have a lot of patience, but we need to talk about this so that everybody can actually know where we're standing and build efforts together to make the nation better. Equally so, this 2021 publication reflects anesthesiology statistics of gender ratios in 2019, of which for every one man, there are half a woman. Can you imagine how disappointed the man in the street would be? And it brings us to this concept that Mary Frances Winters, albeit an American, black American, has coined, black fatigue. And it boils down to the fact that I'm sure many leaders of color attest to overt microaggressions experienced in the workplace because of that perpetual question. How many times do black professional colleagues have to face the subjugation of people wondering, oh, do they really deserve the job? It must have been an affirmative action appointment. Why do we, a smart, educated, enlightened academic bunch who claim to be so obsessed about evidence-based medicine, not then go back and read the credentials of that person? Why do we automatically stem and attest to something being an affirmative action placement? We have to change our mindsets as individuals as well so that we can progress society to the betterment. And it boils down to my favorite ethical topic in ethics of epistemic injustice. And essentially, testimonial type of epistemic injustice is to do with the bias against a person's credibility purely based on their gender, race, and identity. I was actually hoping to have an active survey to ask people in the audience, how many of you feel that you were prejudiced on your opinion purely because of how you looked? But it's the reality that many professionals across the world face on a daily basis. But not only within the inter-individual engagement, but again within the inter-regional. And this whole idea of West has changed. We now divide our mindsets into the global North and the global South. And in May 2021, in this open letter, African scientists called for the decolonization of global health research funding after a US-led malaria initiative favored partnering with Western institutions over the very own African institute who's actually treating the malaria. But more importantly, I want to make reference to us as African clinicians. They didn't care how many black doctors or white doctors were in that African study because we all are African, we all are the same, and we need to stop differentiating that. And just like there is black fatigue, there is also white fatigue. And essentially, white fatigue is that constant exhaustion of having to feel shame and blame and guilt. This is not the intention of diversity, equity, and inclusivity. These stigmatizations towards white people have resulted in many resisting the efforts towards these transformations based on prejudice rooted in that unknown experience, prejudice rooted in fear of change. They worry that perhaps these initiatives might disrupt their current situations. And I'm sure many perhaps worry that it might impact their financial situations, and perhaps also see that this is a misguided or misinterpreted concept. And often they see it as a form of punishment for historical blame. It's not. It's about your children and your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, because in years from now, they are going to be part of the global South. So, how do we move forward? Ubuntu is a philosophy of Africa that exists across all societies of Africa. It's derived from the isiXhosa proverb, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. It translates to I am because we are. It is the African philosophy of humanism that links the individuals to the greater collective. And it existed way before colonization. And it's probably the reason why the African society's culture existed and persevered through years of marginalization and segregation. Ubuntu dismisses exclusion, rejection, marginalization, stigmatization, and it applies to us all who are off this earth, off this soil, off this Africa. Perhaps when considering day, we should amplify the things that unite us, and instead of seeing transformation on a scale of advantage or who's disadvantaged, we should actually see it as lifting each other up. Consider how in the last 5 months, by having a government of national unity, the economy is already feeling a bit of a butterfly growth. So we have a role in advocacy and should have the courage to recognize and highlight our commonalities while celebrating our differences. In the words of the king of pop, make it a better place for our children's children. I am fifth generation South African, and it's time that we start unmasking all our outer barriers of what we look like, because deep down I know nothing else than this soil that is the earth that I've grown on, and I am African. And my madam in my house, we speak a different language, we have different tastes in food, we engage with our communities differently when we're in the park. But oh my God, I cannot live without this being. She's the love of my life. And that's it. We must remember we have potential to love, and this anxiety we have is not intrinsically our own, it's what we've been indoctrinated through hegemonic rule. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ruben, for such exciting talk. And I think nobody was sleeping, eh? So I'm honored to invite our next speaker, who is Dr. Asam Dasu. He's a co-founder of the Health and Public Policy Progressive Health Forum, but he has a diverse experience in civics and political health activism. Welcome on board, sir.
Good morning. I'm awake. I came in a little late during your presentation, Dr. Hendricks, but I immediately identified with what you were saying because I knew the environment you're talking about, even though I'm not sure which hospital you were talking about. And Dr. Naidu, very, very interesting talk. just don't call me a person of color. That's an Americanism used to be very polite about black people. I'm black. But then I'm black because I've always had the Biko approach to being black. Huh? And that is, you're either white or you're black. And that's from 500-year history you mentioned, which also started in the United States, southern states. So let me begin just first of all by thanking you all and the organizers of this conference. And you reminded me from your last slides about a time some almost 40 years ago. I've been a doctor since 1986. And in 1989, there was a huge shift in global politics, not least here. And found myself as part of the United Democratic Front, pretty much at the forefront of opening the healthcare front against apartheid. And for my sins, I was appointed to the Release Mandela Committee, chaired by the current president, President Cyril Ramaphosa at that time. And it was just a 3-month stint. The 3-month stint coincided with January to March 1990, when I would then, at the end of March, give it up to the next representative from the health sector. But in February, as fate would have it, one Nelson Mandela was released. And so I was dragooned into providing him, or being the ANC person, to make sure that we had emergency care and health care ready for him. And this was not going to be part of my speech. Please give me the extra minute on this, because he's stimulated this thought. And I was therefore at Victor Verster Prison with the leaders, Cyril Ramaphosa, Trevor Manuel, Cheryl Carolus, and of course, eventually, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, who kept the world waiting, and kept him waiting to walk out of prison. That's the first time I saw him. And of course, it was very tense because we had no idea how he would be received in the country. And I had with me a cardiothoracic surgeon and an anesthetist with a full kit, surgical kit in the back of the vehicle. And we were the fourth car in the convoy that left. And of course, this was all very, very intense. And we were all stressed. And Cheryl Carolus was the head of the health portfolio in the ANC, and she was with me. And we were heading along the back roads of Dipam, where the prison was, to the main highway. And you're passing all these farms, and there's gravel, and there's dust. And we're driving fast because Cape Town is erupting, waiting for the man. And we suddenly come to a screeching halt. And I thought the worst. You know, I'm young, so I would think the worst, right? So I'm out of the car, looking at his car, four cars ahead of us. And the door opens, and there steps out Nelson Mandela, and the first time I see that smile. Because he was very somber when he came out. That's me. Then I saw where he was headed, to the side of the road, where there was a farm gate, outside of which stood a very tall, large Boer farmer with his veldskoen and khakis and hat. Next to him, a woman carrying an infant, presumably his wife. And Nelson Mandela had stopped the whole convoy. He insisted, because the man was holding a sign saying, "Welcome, Nelson." He went up to him, hugged him, shook his hand, hugged the lady, kissed the baby. And Cheryl Carolus mentioned to me, as I watched this, remember this moment. Everything changes now. He'd come out after 27 years, jailed by the people represented by this farm. First person he embraces, first person, publicly, is an Afrikaner farm. And that's how I view my 40 years in health activism. But let me now digress, because I've heard all of the inputs, and they're very good and clearly defining the challenges we face as a country. And I'd like to focus on healthcare, because that's my stuff, but also to say that healthcare is not just that anesthetic machine you very, very clever people know how to manage. It starts long before. So it starts with geology, believe it or not. So, and particularly geologic time. So in 2016, a working group of geologists recommended that a new epoch be declared, the Anthropocene. Now, epochs are thousands of years long, and we were in the Holocene until this revelation. This revelation of the Anthropocene is only 400 years, maybe from the Industrial Revolution. But you make these changes when there is when there's a complete record of the effects of the previous 1,000 years on the sedimentary rock. Now, they did this because the massive increase in the volume and the variety of carbon isotopes created by human activity since the Industrial Revolution is leaving indelible signs in the sedimentary record. And this is fundamentally altering the biology and chemistry of environments. There's now twice as much active nitrogen and phosphorus on the surface of the planet compared to the past, both from the chemical fertilizer production and from mining. And we shall mark the sedimentary rock forever. The atmosphere and the oceans have demonstrably altered their dynamic patterns due to these chemical alterations in ways never before witnessed or recorded, and are more than likely to be permanent, given the consequences of the measurable global increase in ocean temperatures and the consequences on both currents, ocean currents, and on marine life. We've created new materials that will outlast us as a species, not just our generation, as a species. Plastics, new compounds, which are widely distributed throughout the world, technofossils, they are called, that the geologists of the future will study. Last and perhaps most relevant consequence is how the Anthropocene has altered the expected natural trajectory of life on the planet, creating a disruption and even a break with the process of natural selection. So the rate of species extinction is many times higher than on record, and is accelerating, in keeping with the unprecedented redistribution of plant and animal species between continents and across oceans, homogenizing it. I'm talking about livestock, and I'm talking about big food, right? So we're having all of this. So we're breaking away from the diversity of the natural world. Soon such non-natural evolution, and that's my phrase, will become prevalent among human beings as well. CRISPR comes to mind, right? Creating enormous implications for human rights in a world of finite physical and natural resources. The extraordinarily wide range of geological signals associated with the Anthropocene are comparable in scale now, in 400 years, to those of earlier epochs, which lasted 10,000 years, like the Holocene. And though geological opinion remains divided, this is not an official appellation of a new era, the Anthropocene, but it's growing in acceptance. It's unavoidably part of our consciousness. It's unavoidably part of our activity. And there's a point to all this, believe me. I don't offer this as a disconnected vignette, okay? Regardless of when they're going to announce this. But this lived reality creates a certain reality. This lived reality creates a certain new reality in which we can think about it. So this lived reality, let's call them the four horsemen of the Anthropocene. I'm playing on the apocalypse a little bit. It's a concatenation of four coinciding global crises arising from the same human activity that creates the putative new epoch, right? So the first is catastrophic global climate change, as distinct from naturally occurring climate change. The preponderance of evidence weighs heavily in favor of human agency in this regard, with carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions causing global warming, which the Earth will survive, but which its living inhabitants are not likely to, at least not as surface terrestrial creatures in the next few hundred years. The second is the crisis in modern economic organization. In this period, in the form of the neoliberal political economy, a variant of market fundamentalism bred in tooth and claw, driving a catastrophic trend in inequality. We've heard a bit about that. Between a logarithmically smaller class of people accumulating exponentially greater wealth, an exponentially greater portion of humanity experiencing a logarithmic decline in income. Now, this seemingly unstoppable widening would it would be anathema to Adam Smith, who first described capitalism in the way we know it. And he spoke of the invisible hand. What we're seeing is the disfigurement of this invisible hand into a mailed fist. And the tide that lifts all boats, as we hear from the economists, is now swamping all the vessels, except perhaps for super yachts. So the third horseman of this Anthropocene is the decline in both the capacity and capability of states, of nation states, to securely distribute public goods and services that enable economic growth, social stability, and political reform. Now, the trends are clear in both the industrialized and in the developing world of the reduction in the power of the state, predicated on the monopoly of the use of force, a monopoly being eroded by non-state actors, and a proximate cause of global instability. Let me just digress. We speak about Africa's underdevelopment. The leadership in the post-colonial era is as guilty as the colonial entities that subjugated Africa in the first place in its lack of development. So I think this is important to understand. But the last of these crises is the age of COVID-level pandemics. The massive disruption of the natural world caused by human activity has resulted in the decimation of the well-ordered biodiversity of the natural world through normal evolution. Consider that from the time of the Industrial Revolution 400 years ago, the ratio of all terrestrial biomass, all living things on land, apart from plants, I'm talking about land animals and insects, was about 10%, comprised of humans and their livestock, and 90% wildlife. Today, that ratio is reversed, with humans and their livestock at 90% and wildlife at 10%. What do you think is going to happen? The consequence is that the large animal reservoirs that kept viruses species confined have been disrupted by habitat encroachment and outright destruction, resulting in increased zoonotic transformation and transmission, and of course, epidemic and pandemic outbreaks. We have seen a record number just in the last 50 years. Now, all of this is about what kind of healthcare we have. All of that affects healthcare, and I'll tell you why. They have a bearing on how to consider organizing healthcare systems, which must be understood as a utilitarian resource. The maintenance of good human health, however, is not determined by health systems, but by social and economic organization. Now, health is a function of access to sufficient nutrition, to adequate shelter, to potable water and sanitation, to basic education, to personal and communal safety, to economic opportunity, and to social protection and recreation. Healthcare systems were designed to meet the deterioration of health occasioned by the breakdown in these social and economic determinants of health. It is axiomatic that the economic and population disparities between and among states will result in disparately resourced healthcare systems. We see that. The severity of the breakdown in these basic amenities of life have a bearing on life expectancy. Socioeconomic deprivation means a shorter lifespan overall. So, a practical example. 20 million South Africans, 1/3 of the population of this, the most industrialized country on the continent, experience various levels of hunger, moderate to severe, daily. Of these, 15 million are children, 3/4 of those, a quarter of the whole population. 2 generations of South African children born since 1994, the latest at age 5 today, with 27% of them demonstrating measurable stunting, 2024, caused by malnutrition, both protein, calorie, and micronutrient deficiency. Those of you in front line of our health service see this daily. We have a government that denies it exists. They deny it because, hell, it's not going to make them look good. Okay. By the age of 2, these children have a measurable decline in all scientific metrics of growth and development. By the age of 5, these children already demonstrate a significant difference in comparable physical stature and body strength, cognitive underdevelopment, and high childhood mortality compared to normally nourished peer groups. By the age of 8, in the absence of intensive therapeutic levels of high-calorie nutrition, the condition is permanent, with adulthood characterized by smaller stature and lower cognitive capacity relative to peer groups, resulting in poorer economic achievement, lower life expectancy, but also poor health, needing healthcare intervention far in excess of what their peer groups need. Show me your height at the age of 2 and I'll show you your future. That's how a nutrition scientist explained it recently. However, whatever the level of economic development, the common human experience is also, of course, of senescence. And as we age, we know our health breaks down, which is fairly constant and largely well known. And I say this as an introduction to what we have. And sorry, I see my time is running out, so I'll try to be brief. But you did give me those extra minutes for my little story beginning, right? So after a hopeful start, when we got our freedom in 1994, we found that we have a public healthcare system that's rather well distributed. So even in the bizarre organization of apartheid into homelands, they built public health systems. Now, it was surprising to us, but we had already planned for a post-apartheid healthcare system. What we found was a boon. We have a public health system, quite widely distributed, well-resourced. Of course, there were gaps, and we need to fix those. And that's what the first administration did. When you consider that up to 90% of the population uses the public health system as the system of first and ultimate resort, cradle to grave, you would expect that the sheer neglect and the legendary mismanagement over the last 2 decades of this public health system has not only driven disillusioned health professionals out of the public service, but patients with means also forced to pay eye-watering insurance premiums from after-tax income. This is an important fact. This is discretionary income for private health care, a trend manifest in private education and private security as well. Now, we have a public health system that was undergirded by 10 excellent medical schools, 4 of which still are in the top 300 of the world rankings. It's a decline from where we were, but it's still remarkable for that, and no less exceptional for it. Now, more than medicines, facilities, equipment, and other components, health professionals and healthcare workers are the bedrock and the quintessence of any healthcare delivery system, because all healthcare is local. Doesn't start in some sterile office somewhere. It's the interaction between health worker and patient. That's where that rubber hits the road. And everything around it and before it and after it must be attuned to that moment. No one told the government. Now, if one needs further proof of this, let's think about what happened during the pandemic. We only got through this pandemic thanks to the public healthcare professionals and workers and health workers who went above and beyond the call of duty and lost 3,000 of their own, from professors to nurses to other health workers, to the virus. They had neither the support they needed and was promised, nor vaccination. They stole the PPE budget, almost R1 billion, leaving our health workers exposed, not giving them a vaccine more than a year after the pandemic. We're pleased. Terrible thing that happened. But as PHF, we held their feet to the fire until they got us vaccines. And that was thanks to the president, whose wife is a doctor, who knows us. I'm a contemporary of the minister and the former minister and the deputy minister, all at the same medical school. And his wife was there just ahead of us. And she put the open letter to him at breakfast, we are told. He was shocked. He said, but Zweli told me we have vaccines. We're going to get it from COVAX, this thing that they did in the UN. Obviously, it wasn't good enough. Health workers were at their wits' end. We were getting into the second wave, no vaccine. And what happened was that he called his counterpart in India, Modi, where the Serum Institute of India was the world's largest producer of these vaccines, even though we made all of these, the biggest trials were here of the AstraZeneca and the J&J vaccine. And they were making them there. And he asked, please, can you send us some, at least for our frontline workers? And Modi managed to get the Serum Institute to send us 1.5 million doses. Unfortunately, when they arrived, we were dealing with Beta, the Beta variant, which was the vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, was showing very reduced efficacy. But we had the J&J vaccine that was sent to us, fortunately, because the main trial here was handled by Professor Glenda Gray, and she got it from us. So all I'm saying is that when we think about healthcare and this very astute and very technologically advanced group of healthcare professionals that are in this conference, you represent the most technically proficient cohort of the professional workforce in the country, bar none. That's what a health professional is. It takes you 9 years just to qualify. No other professional has to do that. You're also at the coalface of human existence. No other professional does that. The importance you have is enormous, which is why I say health workers are the quintessence of healthcare. The disdain, the disrespect, the dismissiveness of the state towards health workers is legendary in this country. So they'll foist an NHI on us. An NHI that suddenly arose when Jacob Zuma came to power. We had a post-apartheid plan. It was running. We would have had an integrated system of a public health care service alongside a private health care system, which would create seamless access to all necessary health care, unimpeded access to all necessary health care. That concept is in our constitution, access. Instead, they went and took an off-the-shelf policy from the policy kiosk at the WHO and called it NHI, National Health Insurance. In one meeting I attended, the new mandarins of this Jacob Zuma administration, who was propelled in by the left, who hated private healthcare, said, we don't want this. Here's the new policy. 3 overhead projector slides, handwritten, NHI, uncosted, unresearched. They've taken 15 years to pull together this act, 15 years during which time they took their eyes off the public health service. It went into severe decline. This potentially world-class national health service went into decline through their sheer negligence and the sheer disdain for anything sensible in healthcare. So we see the effects now. Okay, we have an act which is nothing. Honestly, it's not worth reading the. Parliamentarians who pass the act don't even understand it. One had the gall to ask me, so you say that they'll do away with all medical schemes and insurance at this point as it rolls out. Does that also include PARMED and GEMS? She'd just been one of the MPs who passed it in the National Assembly. You see, the law is for other people, not for them. Keep your hands off my medical aid card, Baba. That's the message we got. We are completely opposed to this. There is a very strong health plan that was just abandoned that we need to just progress, update it suitably to get, and we would have gotten it by 2012, 2015. Here we are, 2024, in a worse state than we are. A private sector that has grown explosively, not because they went and poached, but because the public sector went into decline. And so naturally the private markets will respond. It is a constitutional right to have private health care. We understand that. But we have a government that sees it as an enemy. And therefore, the government is the problem here. And I want to end, and forgive me for taking extra time, just by saying that we are at the cusp of a very important moment. Some of you may have seen the Bella Bill signed by the President. This is the Education Amendment Bill. And on the eve of signing it, there was a lot of opposition. It's taken 5 years to get us here, whatever one thinks about the bill. But AfriForum and Solidarity, two strong organizations in their own right, but having a very strong proclivity to the former, let's say, former rulers, and wanting to maintain privileges. The two CEOs call the president, and when he signs, he says, okay, we'll suspend these clauses for 3 months. It was a desperate attempt to get some sense here. That's what the president has to do all the time. And what occurred to me was that not only did he not listen, or did they not listen, to the progressive organizations that had also raised similar problems with the bill, but he did respond to AfriForum and Solidarity. And this government of national unity that you speak of has improved the economy, but nothing else. Because what it is a misreading of the electoral outcome. They have decided that the electorate just told them, okay, in an avuncular way, why don't you all just work together? It was a stinging rebuke that they don't understand. So they think they're all on a high wicket here. We're going to get more of the same, unfortunately. But in saying that, when he suspends these two clauses for 3 months, what is he saying? What they couldn't fix in 5 years, they're going to fix in 3 months? We told business, who went to the president and said, this NHI bill, please take out section 33. The rest is great, noble intention. You know, it was nauseating to watch the private sector and business. In fact, this act throws the public health system further under the bus. This is a sleight of hand. It is not worthy of this country and what we have. And so I'll leave you with that. When we talk about politics in healthcare, it's all about politics. All healthcare is political. Thank you.
Okay, so this session is supposed to end at past, but can I ask for an extra 5 minutes to allow for comments? to all our speakers. I'm going to ask all the speakers to come up to the stage. Thank you very much. This was a very, very good session. And I'm sure there are lots of questions. Prof, go ahead. So it will be one question per speaker, please. Yes, please.
So, yeah, excellent talks. Mine is a comment. Dr. Naidu, amen. And Dr. Lukazia. I'm a product of the 1976 uprisings, high school uprisings. So you took me there. Dr. Lukazia, you call for collaboration, working together. And I just want to say, as Africans right across the continent, our DNA remembers that we are a rich continent in terms of culture, diversity. We know that we are a beautiful continent. And our DNA remembers that we collaborate, we break down boundaries. What we have been practicing lately are things that were imposed on us by colonialism. But if our DNA remembers, we can break down those boundaries and go back to being the strategists and pragmatists that can work smarter and start collaborating as we do, and being proud Africans and generating solid African solutions to the problems we were raising. Homegrown solutions to sort out our healthcare problems. You know, the politicians may take a little while to get on top of, but we can do this. You know, to quote Barack Obama, yes, we can.
Yeah.
But all is not lost. So that's what I want to say. But you really took me there.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? Okay. I would like to comment to Wayne and to just say thank you very much to WFSA for the role you play. But I would like maybe for you to reflect on how you ensure that the different countries are actually not making it a tick box.
How different countries rather than WFSA?
I know WFSA has the effort and you've got it in your constitution, but what actually happens at grassroots level, how do we ensure that what they bring forward to WFSA is actually what is going on the ground? Because a lot of countries have a colonial history and there may still be, you know, undertones in terms of a lack of inclusivity.
I think it's really difficult when we're WFSA is a federation, but we are made up by all these member societies around the world, and we don't dictate to member societies exactly how they organise things. All we can do is offer advice and make the sort of points that I was making before, that we all benefit from diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think we can help with specific things like writing of constitutional documents and guidelines for some of our member societies. There are also already a number of member societies that are very advanced with these considerations, and perhaps it is a matter of identifying those societies and seeing where we can team up different organisations so that we're not just ticking the box, we actually are practicing DEI in a meaningful way. Does that answer your question?
It does. I was just worried that if it's a WFSA initiative, it actually needs to filter down to the different societies. Otherwise, it's not authentic. It's what you fear, that it's a tick box exercise. Thank you. Are there any questions for? Please go ahead. Step up to the mic.
Thank you very much. Dr. Odaba is my name, from Nairobi, Kenya. And thank you for all the speakers. This was very interesting and enlightening. So my question is to Professor Morris from WFSA. I couldn't help but notice that the board of WFSA does not represent all the regions. I wonder how we are going to solve that so that each of the regions that the society has already outlined has a representative on the board. Because like we learned yesterday, if you are not at the table, I'll leave it there. And then for the presidency, I wonder if making it rotational would probably be more representative, like other organizations have done. Thank you.
Yeah, two very good questions. And the council is made up with, there is representation there. It's defined by our constitution. We do not have a similar requirement for that representation for the board as our constitution currently stands. There are only 7 members on the board, and there are elections for each of those members for specific positions like president, president-elect, secretary, director of partnerships, and so on. So in fact, Edwin Lugazia this year stood for secretary. There were 3 people standing for secretary. One of them was also from India, Dr. Bala, and somebody from the United States. Dr. Bala was elected by the membership of WFSA. So that's just how things are at the moment, but it is not something that cannot be changed, but that's the way it is organised at the moment. The second question was rotational presidency. I think that's actually something that we could consider in the future. And it is something that African societies could propose to the General Assembly, which takes place at the World Congress, or initially have some conversations with the Secretariat. It is the sort of thing that actually could find a lot of favour amongst our member societies around the world. And, you know, the thing about constitutions is that we have made quite radical changes to our constitution and over the last few years, and they are all approved in Singapore. With constitutions, they need to be living documents. We need to change them, and we need to think about new ways of doing things better. So it was the geographical representation for the World Congress, so rotating around those 5 regions, which was something that I really pushed for. But I quite like that idea of the rotation of the presidency as well. Something to consider. You know, we want to be a responsive organisation, and so and we will be guided by our member societies because we are our member societies. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make one comment from a comment you made again, that you being a white person, white male, standing in front of us is a problem. Just to say that I am leveraging on white fatigue to say that it's actually a good thing when you are a white person, a white male, advocating for DEI, because then you are believed better, or it spreads to the rest of the people if you are the person who's an advocate for that. So I just want to thank everyone who spoke on this session, especially the insights we got about the health system. I think we all agreed that the NHI is a bad idea, and it was good now to hear from someone who's experienced and knowledgeable that it was really, really a bad idea. So thank you very much. I'll allow my co-chair to close the session.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Marara, for sharing this session. And more importantly, thank you, the speakers, for the nice talks. And delegates, we appreciate your presence. And we are sorry for taking most of your time. I know it's lunchtime, but we really enjoyed your presence and participation in this session. Thank you. Thank you.